Welcome back, everyone. LanceScurvX here, the Scurv podcast. I want to talk about this thing called attention. Has attention become the world's new drug? There was a time when attention meant something. It came after you worked hard, sacrificed, created something meaningful, or made a real difference in someone's life. People noticed because there was something worth noticing. Today, we're living in a strange era where many people don't wait for genuine accomplishments before demanding recognition. They've become convinced that simply being seen is the achievement itself. It's no longer about making an impact. It's about making an appearance. Social media has become the perfect feeding ground for this mindset. Every swipe introduces another face begging to be acknowledged. Every refresh reveals another carefully posed photograph, another meaningless video, another update that says absolutely nothing but somehow demands everyone's time. The sad part isn't that people share their lives. That's always been part of human nature. The tragedy is that many have become emotionally dependent on strangers validating their existence several times a day. What's even more disturbing is that many don't realize they become addicted. They believe they're simply staying active or being a brand. But if we're honest, not everyone flooding the internet every few minutes has a business, a message, or a purpose. Many are simply feeding a hunger that never seems to go away. It's a hunger that no number of likes, comments, followers, or shares can satisfy because the real emptiness doesn't live inside the phone. It lives much deeper. That's why you'll often notice that the people posting the most are sometimes the ones who seem the least at peace. They're constantly uploading another selfie, another meal, another gym session, another meaningless dance, another video of themselves staring into the camera without saying anything that enriches another person's life. They're broadcasting themselves almost like a television station that never signs off. The audience may grow, shrink, or completely disappear. But the performance never ends because the need isn't really for communication, it's for validation. The uncomfortable truth is that excessive attention seeking rarely begins with social media. The phone didn't create the hunger. It simply gave the hunger an unlimited buffet. Long before the first selfie was uploaded, many people were already carrying invisible wounds that shaped how they viewed themselves. Social media merely handed those wounds a microphone, an audience, and 24-hour access to applause. That's why understanding the psychology behind this behavior matters. When we understand the root, we begin to understand why some people can never seem to stop chasing eyes that are looking their way. When your self-worth depends on someone else looking at you. One of the most common reasons people become addicted to attention is because they never developed a stable sense of self-worth while growing up. Some people only received affection when they performed well, looked attractive, entertained adults, or met impossible expectations. Love became something they earned instead of something they simply received. As adults, that lesson often follows them into every relationship and every social media account they create. They continue chasing approval because deep inside, they still believe they're only valuable when someone else says they are. What's heartbreaking is that this pattern usually becomes invisible to the person living it. They don't wake up saying they want attention because they feel empty. Instead, They convince themselves they're just sharing their lives like everyone else. Yet every notification becomes an emotional measurement of their worth. If a picture receives hundreds of likes, they feel alive. If it receives very little attention, their confidence quietly crashes. Their emotions become tied to an algorithm that doesn't know their name and certainly doesn't care about their well-being. Many people trapped in this cycle begin measuring themselves against complete strangers. Suddenly, someone else's vacation feels better than theirs. Someone else's relationship looks happier. Someone else's body appears more attractive. Someone else's success seems greater. Before long, they're no longer living their own lives. They're performing one. Every moment becomes an opportunity to create content instead of creating memories. Life slowly transforms into one endless audition for people they may never even meet. The child who never felt seen. Another powerful reason behind constant attention seeking often begins inside a home where a child felt invisible. Maybe there were too many siblings competing for affection. Maybe the parents were emotionally unavailable because of work, addiction, depression, or constant conflict. Maybe nobody intentionally ignored the child, but the emotional connection simply wasn't there. Growing up in that environment can leave a person with a deep longing to finally be noticed. When someone carries that kind of emotional emptiness into adulthood, social media can feel like the answer they've been searching for all along. Every notification whispers the words they waited years to hear. We see you. The problem is that digital attention and emotional healing aren't the same thing. One gives a quick emotional rush, the other requires honest self-reflection, healthy relationships, and the difficult work of rebuilding self-worth from the inside out. That's why some people seem unable to disappear from your timeline for even a few hours. Silence makes them uncomfortable because silence forces them to sit alone with themselves. If the phone isn't ringing, if nobody is commenting, if nobody is reacting, uncomfortable emotions begin rising to the surface. Instead of facing those feelings, another picture gets posted, another video goes live, another meaningless update appears. Not because there's something important to say, but because quiet moments can become unbearable for someone who's spent a lifetime believing they only exist when someone else is watching. The wounds that never stop asking to be applauded. Not everyone who seeks attention grew up feeling invisible. Some were noticed plenty, but only under painful circumstances. They may have lived in homes where criticism came easier than encouragement. Every mistake was magnified. Every success was ignored. Instead of hearing words that built confidence, they heard words that chipped away at it. By the time they reached adulthood, they'd learned to chase approval because they were trying to silence years of rejection that still echoed in their minds. Every compliment became another temporary bandage covering an emotional scar that never truly healed. What's dangerous about this kind of emotional wound is that it creates a person who's always looking outside of themselves for proof that they're enough. They don't trust their own accomplishments. They don't believe their own value. They wait for strangers to tell them they're attractive, intelligent, funny, talented, or successful. The applause becomes louder than their own inner voice. When that happens, they're no longer living according to who they really are. They're living according to whatever gets the strongest reaction from the crowd. That's why you'll often notice dramatic shifts in personality online. A person who once appeared humble suddenly becomes loud. Someone who once valued privacy begins exposing every detail of their personal life. Someone who never sought the spotlight suddenly can't spend an hour without uploading another carefully staged moment. It's not always because they've changed. Sometimes it's because they've discovered that drama attracts attention faster than peace ever will. Social media rewards emotional extremes. Calm rarely goes viral. Humility doesn't always trend. Wisdom often gets overlooked while outrage races across the internet in minutes. That's created an environment where many people unconsciously learn that the fastest way to stay relevant is to become louder, more controversial, more revealing, or more shocking than everyone else. Before long, they're no longer expressing themselves naturally. They're feeding an audience that's impossible to satisfy. Abandonment doesn't always leave when people do. One of the deepest emotional injuries a person can carry is abandonment. Sometimes it comes through divorce, sometimes through death, sometimes through a parent who is physically present but emotionally absent. Sometimes it arrives through friendships or relationships that ended without explanation. Whatever form it takes, abandonment often leaves behind one haunting fear. What if everyone leaves me? That fear doesn't always announce itself openly. Instead, it quietly shapes behavior for years. Constant posting can become a way of making sure people don't forget you. Endless selfies become reminders that you're still here. Frequent updates become attempts to remain visible in a world where disappearing feels emotionally dangerous. The person may never admit this to themselves, but every notification offers a brief reassurance that they haven't been completely abandoned after all. Sadly, reassurance gained this way never lasts. The likes slow down, the comments stop, people scroll past without reacting. Suddenly, the anxiety returns, demanding another post, another picture, another video. It's a cycle that feeds itself because the emotional wound underneath has never actually been healed. The person who's trying to prove everyone wrong. Some people aren't posting because they love attention. They're posting because they're carrying years of humiliation. Maybe they were bullied in school. Maybe family members constantly underestimated them. Maybe an old partner made them feel worthless. Maybe they spent years hearing that they'd never amount to anything. Those experiences can create a powerful desire to prove people wrong. Success itself isn't unhealthy. Wanting to improve our life isn't unhealthy either. But there's a major difference between building a meaningful life and performing one for an audience. When every purchase becomes a photo opportunity, when every vacation becomes evidence that you're winning, when every expensive meal must be documented, it raises an important question. Who are you really trying to convince? Sometimes the answer isn't the people online at all. Sometimes it's a younger version of yourself who still remembers being laughed at, ignored, rejected, or told you would never become anything special. That's why some social media accounts feel less like personal journals and more like non-stop advertisements. Every post says, "Look at me now." Every picture says, "See what I have." Every video says, "Don't forget I exist." Yet beneath the expensive clothes, perfect lighting, and carefully chosen angles, there's often a wounded person still hoping yesterday's pain will finally disappear if enough strangers admire today's image. When your identity becomes a performance. Perhaps one of the saddest consequences of constant attention seeking is that many people eventually lose touch with who they really are. They become experts at creating an image while becoming strangers to themselves. When every decision is filtered through the question, will people like this? Authenticity slowly dies. Instead of asking what brings them peace, they ask what brings engagement. Instead of asking what makes them happy, they ask what will increase followers. Instead of living in the moment, they are constantly viewing life through the imaginary camera that's always recording inside their minds. That's why you'll often see people interrupt beautiful moments just to capture content. Families gather around a dinner table, but before anyone takes a bite, phones appear. A breathtaking sunset becomes less about gratitude and more about getting the perfect angle. Acts of kindness are recorded before they're even completed because compassion itself has become another opportunity for visibility. At some point, life stops being experienced and starts being produced. Every outing becomes a photo shoot. Every conversation becomes potential content. Every accomplishment becomes another opportunity to remind the world that you're still here. The greatest tragedy isn't that people are documenting their lives. It's that many have become so busy documenting life that they've forgotten how to actually live it. When being alone feels like disappearing. There are people who genuinely fear being alone with their own thoughts. Silence feels threatening because silence gives unresolved emotions room to speak. The phone becomes more than entertainment, it becomes an escape. Instead of confronting loneliness, they live stream. Instead of processing grief, they post. Instead of healing insecurity, they upload another selfie. Instead of asking difficult questions about themselves, they wait for someone else to tell them they're amazing. The attention becomes emotional anesthesia. It numbs uncomfortable feelings for a little while, but once the effect wears off, the emptiness returns, demanding another dose. That's why many people become restless when their phone isn't nearby. They aren't simply checking messages anymore. They're checking their emotional pulse. They're asking the internet whether they still matter. No human being was designed to carry that burden. Your worth was never meant to be determined by a comment section. Your identity was never supposed to rise and fall with an algorithm. When your value depends on digital applause, you'll spend your entire life performing for an audience that's already looking for the next distraction. When the brain becomes addicted to applause, there comes a point where attention seeking isn't only emotional anymore, it becomes biological. The human brain is designed to reward experiences that feel pleasurable or meaningful. Every notification, every like, every new follower, and every positive comment can trigger the release of dopamine, a chemical involved in motivation and reward. By itself, that's not a bad thing. The problem begins when someone starts depending on those little bursts of excitement to feel emotionally alive. Before long, checking social media becomes less of a choice and more of a reflex. A person reaches for the phone without even realizing they're doing it. They open one app, then another, hoping something new has happened since they looked 3 minutes earlier. Nothing has changed, yet they keep checking anyway. It starts looking less like entertainment and more like a habit that's quietly taking control of their day and their life. That's why some people can barely finish a meal without photographing it. They can't enjoy a vacation without documenting every second. They can't sit in a waiting room without recording themselves talking into a camera. They're no longer asking whether a moment is worth living. They're asking whether it's worth posting. Somewhere along the way, the experience became secondary to the reaction it might receive online. The saddest part is that dopamine doesn't provide lasting satisfaction. It gives a temporary emotional lift that quickly fades, which leaves the person wanting another hit. That's why one post is never enough. Neither are 10, neither are 100. The cycle simply repeats itself because the brain has learned to crave the next emotional reward. It's not much different from any other habit that offers short-term pleasure while leaving long-term emptiness. When the world becomes your mirror, some people develop a habit of constantly looking to others to tell them who they are. Instead of discovering themselves through character, discipline, wisdom, and purpose, they build their identity from the opinions of complete strangers. If the comments were positive, they feel confident. If the comments are negative, they feel crushed. Their emotional state rises and falls with people who don't even know them and may never ever meet them. That's a dangerous way to live because the internet has no loyalty. Today's favorite can become tomorrow's forgotten face. The same crowd that celebrates you today may ignore you tomorrow. If your confidence depends on public opinion, your peace will always be temporary. Real confidence doesn't need an audience. It doesn't require applause to exist. A truly grounded person can walk into an empty room and still know exactly who they are. They don't need a camera to validate the moment because they already understand their own value. That's a level of freedom that no social media platform can ever give. The fear of becoming irrelevant. Another powerful force driving compulsive posting is the fear of being forgotten. Many people have convinced themselves that if they stop posting for a day, people will move on without them. If they disappear for a week, they'll become invisible. If someone else gains attention, they'll somehow lose their place in the world. That's an exhausting way to live. Imagine carrying the pressure of believing that your value depends on staying in front of people's eyes every single day. Imagine feeling anxious every time your engagement drops or someone else receives more attention than you. That's not freedom, that's emotional captivity dressed up as popularity. The internet moves faster than any human being can keep up with. Trends come and go overnight. Viral stars appear in the morning and are forgotten before the week is over. Chasing permanent relevance in a world built on temporary distraction is like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tightly you squeeze, it eventually slips away. People who understand this stop chasing attention and begin chasing purpose. Purpose leaves a legacy. Attention leaves a memory that's often forgotten by tomorrow. When self-love becomes self-obsession. There's an important difference between healthy confidence and unhealthy self-obsession. Healthy confidence allows you to appreciate yourself without constantly demanding that everyone else do the same. Self-obsession, on the other hand, turns life into an endless performance where every conversation somehow circles back to you. We've reached a point where some people can barely witness a meaningful event without placing themselves at the center of it. Instead of appreciating the beauty around them, they're making sure everyone notices that they were there. Instead of celebrating others, they're searching for ways to redirect the spotlight back onto themselves. That's one of the hidden dangers of excessive attention seeking. It slowly shifts the focus away from relationships, service, gratitude, and genuine connection. The world becomes less about shared experiences and more about personal exposure. Ironically, the more someone tries to become the center of every moment, the more isolated they often become. People may watch them, but they don't truly know them. They may recognize their face, but they don't recognize their heart. Visibility and connection aren't the same thing. One can exist without the other. The loudest people aren't always the happiest. One of the biggest mistakes we make in assuming that the loudest people are the happiest people, sometimes the opposite is true. The constant smiling, posting, posing, and broadcasting can become a mask hiding anxiety, loneliness, insecurity, or emotional pain. That's why we should be careful about judging people too harshly. While some individuals deliberately chase attention at any cost, others may be coping with wounds they don't know how to heal. Understanding the psychology behind the behavior doesn't excuse manipulative actions or constant self-promotion, but it reminds us that human behavior is often more complicated than it first appears. At the same time, compassion shouldn't blind us to reality. If someone constantly drains the energy of every room, interrupts every conversation to redirect attention toward themselves, or floods every online space with endless self-promotion, those behaviors can wear down the people around them. It's healthy to recognize those patterns and decide how much space they'll occupy in your life. There's a difference between supporting someone and feeding a cycle that keeps them emotionally dependent on outside validation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for them is refuse to participate in that endless search for applause. When the camera never turns off. Perhaps the greatest loss in our modern world is that many people no longer know how to simply exist. They feel compelled to announce every thought, photograph every meal, record every outing, and document every emotion before they've even had time to experience it. Life wasn't meant to be lived entirely through a lens. Some of the greatest conversations happen when no camera is rolling. Some of the deepest spiritual moments happen when nobody else knows about them. Some of the strongest acts of love were never posted online. Some of the greatest victories are the quiet ones that build character instead of collecting comments. A person who has found peace within themselves doesn't need to prove to the world that they're living. Their life speaks loudly enough without constant announcements. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. The people who are truly fulfilled are often too busy living meaningful lives to spend every waking moment trying to convince everyone else that they have one. The moment we stop performing and start living. Maybe it's time for all of us to ask ourselves a difficult question. If every social media platform disappeared tomorrow, what would we be? Would we still feel valuable without an audience? Would we still chase our dreams if nobody clapped for us? Would we still find joy in helping others if there wasn't a camera recording every good deed? Those questions reveal more about our emotional health than any profile page ever could. Real confidence has never depended on strangers. It's built quietly through integrity, discipline, character, and purpose. It grows when we keep our promises to ourselves. It grows when we become dependable, when we learn from our failures, when we treat people with dignity even when nobody is watching. That's the kind of confidence that can't be taken away because it was never handed to us by public opinion in the first place. I'm not saying social media is the enemy. Like any tool, it can educate, inspire, connect families across continents, build businesses, and introduce meaningful conversations that otherwise might never happen. The problem begins when the tool starts using us instead of us using the tool. When our mood depends on notifications, when our peace depends on engagement, and when our identity depends on digital applause, we've surrendered something priceless that no amount of followers can ever replace. The people who leave the greatest mark on this world aren't usually the ones who spend every waking hour making sure they're seen. They are the ones who become so committed to purpose that attention naturally follows. They build, they create, they heal, they teach, they encourage, they solve problems, they uplift others. Their value isn't measured by how many people notice them today. It's measured by how many lives became better because they showed up with something meaningful to offer. So the next time another meaningless post flashes across your screen, another carefully staged performance begs for validation, or another person desperately fights to remain the center of attention, don't just see the image. See the possibility that there may be an invisible story behind it. But at the same time, don't allow yourself to become trapped in that same endless cycle. Your greatest accomplishment will never be collecting the most attention. It'll be becoming the kind of person who no longer needs it to know exactly who you are. In a world that's addicted to be noticed, choosing to become genuinely significant instead of merely visible may be one of the most revolutionary decisions you'll ever make. It's really bad out here, y'all. And I see it. And I've pulled back a lot because I don't want to become that. I love living life. And what I share are mere fragments of the life I live. My thing is creating a legacy. My thing is making people better, making you think. I love human nature and the study of it. And since I've become a part of the online community 25 years and a few months ago on a regular basis, I've seen how things have changed. Attention is a drug, and some people don't understand that they are rushing their lives by not living it, seeking fulfillment in the wrong places. So, be careful, be aware, live life, and do the things that are really important. And reach out to the people who mean something to you, because trying to be relevant online, it's not worth trying so hard, because it's like trying to count the endless amount of sands on the beach. It's just another grain of sand that's going to get washed away as more and more people post, podcast, blog, whatever. If you're competing with that for relevance, it's a losing battle. And then when you leave this earth, people will still be posting and they won't even think about you. So reach out to the people who you can affect in a good, positive way, and your loved ones who care about you. Because posting every day to people who are just going to pass by what you do or just give you a like and don't care about you is a big waste of time in the life that the Creator gave you. Much love to you all. LanceScurv out. It's always a pleasure. On to the next one. And as always, I wish you nothing else but peace.